Okay, you're the ones that the Bible has some wonderful promises about, those who are faithful to the end. Yeah, you're going to be especially blessed. We didn't tell everybody.
Cookie break comes in about 15 minutes.
Oh, okay. We'll allow for that. So we talked about the whole gospel. It doesn't include everybody, can't exclude anybody, and all of the things that went along that. The whole church, taking the whole gospel, the good news and the good deeds of Jesus, to the whole city. What is the whole city? How do you look at a city? Well, there are different ways that you can do it. They all are valid. But one way you can look at the city is demographically. And that's basically asking, where did people come from, or how old are they, or what, that kind of thing. Second way of looking at a city is geographically. That's where do people live. And some people who've approached city movements a number of people have approached it that way. It's just, the one by one in Fresno, there's one neighborhood at a time. They just, are working on one at a time until they get the whole city. But we choose to look at it a different way. Rather than demographically or geographically, we look at the city as the way that it works. Not where do people live or where do people come from, but how does the city function? Because if you want to transform a city, perhaps the most effective way to transform a city is to transform the way it's working. Because if you change the way it works, it's going to become a different kind of city. And the way a city works, it doesn't matter whether it's here or in Asia or Europe or wherever it is, every city has three sectors. It has a public sector, a private sector, and a social sector. Now, here it is. I was waiting for, most time when I speak, somebody back there is doing this thing. That's why this thing's throwing me. Public, private, social sector. Public sector, things like government. Private sector are things like businesses, and social sector are things like churches and nonprofits. Now, all three of these sectors are important from our perspective when we're thinking about city transformation. The public sector is important because they're the ones that make the rules. They pass the laws. They're the ones that determine what you can and can't do in the city. And whether you think that the government is too intrusive or not intrusive enough, that's basically what they do. And at some level, that's necessary. If you, for instance, just said, my gosh, I just want to work with foster kids. God's really put that on my heart, I want to work with foster kids. You can't just go find a foster kid, because Health and Human Services has a lot of rules related to who can work with foster kids and what you can and can't do. And those are good rules, by the way. It keeps the child predators away. And they've learned what's effective and what's not effective. And so you've got to go through a government agency in order to do that. So public sector is important for all three of these to be working together, because the public sector makes the rules. So what's the particular strengths of the private sector? Private sector, as I say, businesses. I think there are two things that are important about the private sector. First one is, of the three sectors, it's the only one that makes money. In fact, the other two are supported by the private sector. The public sector is supported through taxes, and the social sector is supported through donations. The public and the social sector do not generate income. So if you want to have a sustainable movement, it ultimately is going to require money. And the private sector, if the private sector is not engaged, then there's probably not going to be the resources to sustain a movement. The second thing the private sector brings, and I think ultimately is more important than the money, the private sector, people in the private sector have what I call the will to act. They're decisive. They make decisions. If they don't, they go out of business. You see, it's only in the public and the social sector that you send things to committee. What does sending things to committee mean? It means this is a really tough decision. We don't have the guts to act on it yet, so we're going to kick the can down the road, as we've heard in the presidential debate. We're going to just delay making a decision. Well, the private sector does not have the luxury of delaying making decisions. If they do, they're out of business before they make the decision. So one of the things that you will discover is characteristic of business leaders is they know how to make decisions. And they make them, no without thought and that kind of thing, but they are decisive in what they do. And we've seen a lot of city movements start that go nowhere, and the reason is nobody is willing to make any tough decisions. And so if you do not have the business community engaged, then you're missing, a key element. Just as a side note, I honestly think, I say this everywhere. There's very few business people in the room right now. Most of us, and I've spent my entire life in the social sector. I've been a pastor of church and foundation director and that kind of thing. But I think if there is a coming revival, spiritual revival, absolutely transforming revival, it is probably going to begin in the business community, not in the church community. I see more yearning on the part of business leaders for something to happen than honestly I do from most pastors. And so that's kind of the way I'm praying, that God will continue to rise up strong business leaders. So the public sector makes the rules, passes the laws, makes the rules. The private sector makes the decisions and provides the resources. So what does the social sector bring to transformation? They bring bodies. They bring people. The largest latent task force in any city sitting in congregations. Everybody, including the church community, was surprised a few years ago when we had 53,000 people in 5 months engaged. We had no idea there were that many people who were willing to do that. And that was, for most people, gave a minimum of half a day. Most people gave an entire day during that period of time. And pastors were surprised. I was a pastor for 35 years, and so I know what it's like to try to engage volunteers in serving. And those of us who've done this are all familiar with the 20-80 rule, that 20% of the people do 80% of the work. Well, maybe. Then there's one of two options on that. Either 80% of the people in your congregation are carnal, they don't love Jesus, they don't love the lost, and or maybe we've not given them enough options. Because you see, there's basically about 5 things that people can do in the church. They can usher, they can teach children, they can lead a Bible study, they can sing in a worship team or sing in the choir, or they can serve on a board. That's about it. And we assume that 100% of the people in our church are going to fit into 5 of those slots. And that's probably a wrong assumption. Now, if we can expand our understanding of what it means to serve the Lord through the church, to serving inside the walls or outside the walls, to being a part, as Eric's church is, they adopted the women's center in town, the battered women's center.
Boulder County Safe House.
Boulder County Safe House, yeah. And now, if you're a member of Calvary Bible Church and you want to be involved in service, you can do it there, or you can do it, that's other ways. They had a ministry fair or do annually at the church in the gymnasium where they invite community organizations that they're partnering with to come and try to get their members to come serve. Why? Because those are avenues of service through the church. Now, at one point, I understood that the number at one point got up to about 40% in that church of people who were serving inside or outside the church. So, what we have done is to limit people in terms of the gifts, the talents, the life experience, the passions they have, and say if they don't fit into our 5 categories, you don't love the Lord and you don't love the lost. What we need to do is to provide more avenues. So, how do we transform a city? We bring together coalition of public, private, social sector entities or agencies. We create partnerships between those. Because there are people in the community that we might want to serve that we either don't have the resources to do it or we don't have the permission to do it. But if we were to work together with the public and the private sectors, we would have the resources and the permission to do it. Increasingly, The public sector cannot do what it is actually commissioned by law to do because of the shrinking resources. Schools are not able to do what they were supposed to do because of shrinking resources. Government agencies, Health and Human Services, are not able to because of shrinking resources. There's a greater openness to having volunteers come from churches to engage than there's ever been because, they don't have a choice now. Now that's not, they won't just let anybody come do anything. But when the trust relationship is built, there's a greater openness to this. Now, this can further be broken down. Within those sectors, it can be broken down into what we call domains. And domain, every word has limitations. We don't mean, dominion theology here or that kind of thing. It's just another designation for subgroups within those three big sectors. What's happening here? I wasn't touching a thing, honestly.
It's the Holy Spirit telling you to move on.
Yeah, there it is. So speed it up, speed it up, speed it up. So within in the public sector, education and government, within the private sector, arts, entertainment, media, and business, and in the social sector, religion and family. In San Diego, as we created Vision San Diego, we actually created another one or two domains, and you can do whatever fits your community. But San Diego is a military community. One out of every 8 people there is related to the military. And so in the public sector, we've got education, government, and military. And we've got nonprofits in the social sector. So we've got 3 sectors and 9 domains that represent. And we've put our board together around that. So we have at least 2 people from each of those 9 domains in our city who are on our board. Because when we come together to talk about our city, we want to hear the voices of our entire city. We don't want a group of pastors trying to make decisions about what the government ought to do, or a group of pastors trying to make a decision about what businesses should be doing or not doing. Now we want government, we want business, we want faith community sitting down together, looking at our city and determining how we can do that. You say, well, gosh, we're not involved in a big city movement. We're just trying to transform our neighborhood. Great, because you know what? You've got these same three sectors and these same domains in your neighborhood. For instance, in our city, we've got the regional offices of Wells Fargo in our city. But do you know what's in the neighborhood? It's a local branch of the Wells Fargo. In the city, we've got the school board with the superintendent and the school board. But in our neighborhood, you know what we have? We got a school. We've got a regional newspaper, the San Diego Union Tribune, but every neighborhood has what? Neighborhood newspaper. Largely advertising, but there's a few articles. See, so we got, on a different scale, you've got your same 3 sectors and you've got your same domains in your neighborhood. So part of our strategy in San Diego is creating these neighborhood coalitions. The one that I was talking about earlier in San Ysidro, we've got 18 major organizations or entities within that community that are involved in the San Ysidro initiative. They represent all 3 sectors and all 9 of the domains that we have. And they're sitting down every month at the table together, working together. And what is the centered set that they are working around? What brings these very different entities together is increasing the graduation rate of the students in the schools in San Ysidro. I'll save that. Yeah.
Okay.
I was going to tell the rest of that story, but see, what do I have here? Let's skip that.
Yep, time for me.
Yeah. Okay, can we do better than this?
Yeah, can we, Sam? Okay, it's always good to have a PowerPoint where you can't read it, but here's the point. I just wanted to capture a book written called Faith in the Halls of Power by Michael Lindsay. And he interviewed 360 people that were leaders in the community. And when he asked the question how they expressed their faith, it'd be more like, well, I wear a cross, or I have a plaque that has a statement on it. And Amy Sherman, who writes this book, who quotes this, she just says, can't we do better than that? Really, that's why you make $20 million a year and employ 500 people. You know, is that what it's about? So I want you just to kind of expand that. The great thing about the domains, and the 7 domains that we listed on there, really come out of a conversation between Bill Bright and Lauren Cunningham, where they independently just decided to come together and talk about if they're going to change society, what specific elements and standpoints need to be changed. And independently of one another, they came up with the same 7 domains. Francis Schaeffer did the same thing when he was over in Europe, same 7. But how many have heard of this guy? Okay, this guy's a believing guy, and he's from Venezuela. He's an engineer. But his passion, his avocation was music. And so 27 years ago, somebody donated music stands to him, 50 music stands, and he thought, I could have 100 kids playing in an orchestra. At the first day, he said 11 kids showed up, and he chose the poorest kids out of the poorest barrios in Caracas. 11 kids showed up, but he told those kids, he said, one day, you will be the finest orchestra in the world. Last year, when the World Cup was on, they said, well, if we were to have a World Cup of orchestras, who would win it? And just from polling people that knew, they said the Venezuelan Youth Orchestra would take number 4. They'd be in 4th place. Placido Domingo, when he heard the Venezuelan Youth Orchestra, he wept. It was so good. And what he's done, he found out that the same need for kids to belong to a gang was met through music. And so he has kind of this little league system called El Sistema, a little league system of orchestras where they actually produce a top-notch youth orchestra, and they play all over the world. And that's the part he's doing in his transformation. But he's taking what do you love to do, and how can you turn that into transformational ministry? How many have heard of this guy? Norman Borlaug. Okay, one person, not surprising, because he's probably the most famous, impactful person you've never heard of. And what he comes from a Christian family, a Lutheran guy. And, to Sam's point, what if God only needed 20% of the giftedness to run the internal mechanisms of the church, but everybody else he gave passions and giftedness to fix something that's broken outside the walls? So rather than lamenting the fact of, God, only 20% of our congregation is active, what if you helped identify and release their passions in the community? So this guy, he's an agronomist. So he discovered a way to grow a different strain of wheat that would be wind resistant and grow with less water. And he took it to the Department of Agriculture, and they said, no, we're not interested. Took it down to Mexico, increased the yield 6 times. Took it over to India, similar results to China. Do you remember 30 years ago when the world was starving, all the high percentage of people were starving? The world owns, when he died, I get Newsweek magazine, and when I got it, the headline's little byline was this. It's called, He Only Saved 1 Billion Lives. Right. And what he did, he went to China and helped them with their rice production. And he won the Nobel Prize in 1970, but continued his work, but he's a famous person never heard of. And imagine now in his church, and he's just a little church in, I think, Iowa, and they have Sunday school teacher recognition night, and they have a little banquet. I doubt if he ever got recognized as living out his kingdom calling by bringing bread to the world. In the slide presentation, if you get this, I've got the quote that he says there about that God's first concern for people is their food. And if we want to transform everything else, it's got to begin with people surviving and food. But there's a guy, so are there any Norman Borlaugs in your congregations, people that are scientists, people that are agronomists, people that are making a difference, but because we don't recognize that as part of their giftedness or what God's doing, we ignore them, and we just hold up, these are professional missionaries, and we hold them up. But how can we platform other people from different domains? I think of Graham Power. Graham Power is the largest developer in Cape Town. When apartheid came, what he did is he was going to get indicted for some tax stuff, but he was a follower of Jesus, but just shaved the rules. But they had a tax amnesty day, and he came forward and came clean with everything, but he said it was really time to kind of turn his life around, invited some friends of ours in, and had him kind of deconstruct his company and then reconstruct it as a kingdom company. What would it be like if we ran this according to the kingdom? So on the doors of the company, it says the Power Group, a kingdom company. And so when you go into these townships, that he would only bring 2 people from the home office, but hire everybody else locally so people could develop work skills and all this kind of stuff. Well, one day he began thinking just about how God wanted to use them. And he said, I think I'm going to call the city of Cape Town together for prayer. Rented the rugby stadium, and like 40, 50,000 people came together. And then he thought, well, what if we go to all of South Africa? And the next year they went to South Africa. Graham Power, so the pastor said, what can we do to help with this organization? He said, well, pastors are good at preaching and praying, but business people are good at raising money, to Sam's point. And we'll take care of this. He is the founder of the Global Day of Prayer that's held on the year of Pentecost. Last year, 500 million believers gathered in 120 countries around the world for times of prayer in stadiums, and started by a business guy. So transformation, the old way of looking at things, we want to put the church at the center and we're going to radiate out and we're going to transform everything. I just think the whole thing, we need to be thinking that where can transformation come from? How can the business community help lead that? Jim Clifton, who's president of Gallup organization, wrote a book a year or so ago called The Coming Jobs War. This is a very important book because he said humans used to desire love. They surveyed people in 120 different countries, representing the 7 billion people on the planet, from Maasai mothers to Manhattan socialites. And he said they used to desire love, money, food, shelter, safety, peace, and freedom more than anything else. Now the last 30 years have changed this. Now people want to have a good job. They want their children to have a good job. He defines a good job as 30 or more hours a week working for an agency that pays their taxes. It's not something under the table, and that's a regular paycheck. He said, now that's not a great job. A great job is those 3 things, plus that somebody's concerned about your development and you have the ability to partake in meaningful work. He said, there's 1.2 billion good jobs on the planet. The world lacks 1.8 billion good jobs. He says every decision that presidents, priests, imams, pastors, fathers need to think about is how does this decision affect job creation? So I'm saying to you guys, what if you as a Houston group, or you as a church group, what goals you had, you brought your business people together, lock them in a room over a weekend, and say don't come out until you've created 5 new jobs. Not church jobs, but jobs that never existed before. So you get a guy that owns a printing company, another guy that owns a landscape business, another guy that owns a law firm. But I want you guys to combine and create a business that never existed before. Because when you don't have a job, if that's the first command that God gave men, it's part of our, when I look at what our agenda ought to be as Christians, somebody's asked me today, what do you think the big issues are that, that should affect our voting? And you can go with the culture war things, that's your bent. But I said, I think the first thing is jobs. Well, why? Because that was the first command given to people. God placed Adam in the garden to cultivate it and to care for it. There was a production thing. That somehow our purpose in life is related to God's created purpose for us. If we don't have a job, if we're out of work, everything breaks down from there. So the second thing would be about the family. That's the second command. Not good for man to be alone. But you can kind of go through this thing, but having a what does the Bible say about this thing? With, in 1962, 75% of our kids grew up in stable own parent homes. Today that percentage is 14%. Where was the church? Where were we when we had a chance to really speak into marriage and stability? And 45% of babies that are born this year will be born out of wedlock. When were we asleep at the wheel on that whole thing? So Josiah Wedgwood. Many of you have heard of. You think of the ending of the slave trade with Wilberforce. And Wilberforce was not a preacher, he was a politician. A Christ follower, but he did that as his role for 20 years. He fought the ending of the slave trade. But one of the people too that God used mightily was a guy named Josiah Wedgwood. Josiah Wedgwood is recognized first and foremost as the father of English pottery. That blue and white pottery that's kind of known still throughout the world. The Wedgwood pottery is still you can buy it today. And during the day, Wedgwood would make jewelry. And if you had, it'd be like I had to have all the people of fashion would have to have the latest Wedgwood piece. And so I'd go to a party, and he created this little medallion there on the right, and it shows a picture of a slave in chains. And it says, and the inscription is, am I not a man and a brother? And I see you've got the latest Wedgwood. They'd see it and go, am I not a man and a brother? And that would pierce the conscience. Wedgwood took his pottery skills and created bowls and plates and spittoons, and so the plate on the bottom there has the same inscription. So you invite people over dinner, and the maid would bring out the mashed potatoes and meat and vegetables covering that. And as people finished their dinner, that portrait would be, or that picture would be unveiled. Am I not a man and a brother? And so God used this artist, this artisan, to really pierce the conscience of the people. See, Shakespeare wrote, he said, the play's the thing to catch the conscience of a king. The play, the arts, the musical, the film is the thing if you want to catch the conscience of a king. You think of last 2010, I was in China and invited to go and speak to a place called New Song Village, and it's 2,000 artists live in this place called New Song Village. And there's a bunch of them that are Christians, and the summer before they had gone out to a village where the gospel kind of first, a place, a mountain people called the Lai Su people. 2 English missionaries came there, and they absolutely transformed that community with education, hospitals, and church planting, and Bible translation. And it was a very musical tribal group that they're speaking, the Lai Su people, and they just learned to love music. Well, this group went back and they welcomed them with songs, and they still sing the same hymns, and they created a tribute to these 2 guys that went there. And then what they did, and it became the spiritual love for China tour that went all over to China, and then they took the exhibition back to England to thank the English people for bringing them the gospel. Now imagine the power of this exhibit, being shown in England, who first brought the gospel to China, and now they're bringing the gospel back to England. So Steve Garber, who mentors a lot of young musicians, and he's with the Washington think tank, but he says this to the groups he ministers to. He says, how can you find ways to write words rooted in the truths of truths in the universe in a language that the world can understand? And that's in some ways the challenge of the arts community. But how can you paint paintings? How can you write screenplays? How can you write books? How can you write poetry? How can you create paintings and sculpture that tells the truths in the universe in a language that the world understands? One of the highlights of I guess it was 2 years ago, almost a year and a half ago now, my wife and I went to the U2 concert down at Mile High Stadium in Denver. How many have been to a U2 concert, by the way? For the one person that's been here. Was that a spiritual experience or not? It is, they started off with the Fray, and it was on May 21st when we're all supposed to disappear, or not. But the Fray gets up, and the leader of the group, he says, today's May 21st, and we're still here. And he prays a prayer out loud in Mile High Stadium. He said, God, thank you for the opportunity to be on stage. Then he hits it, And Bono gets up, and he's linking everything to the brokenness of the world. All along the statistics of all the things that are wrong with the world, and he gives an opportunity for people to make a difference in that thing. And so Bono says, he says, I'm just a musician. He said, but at the end of the day, I want to know that I've torn off a little corner of the darkness. So again, it's not taking people out of their effective domain and bringing them into ministry, but how do we empower people to be transformational agents, whatever venue that they're in? Let's see, Sam's got that. Oh, here's your 9 domains. I think you're up, Sam. Yeah. So this is how San Diego's broken down, right?
As I said, there's two ways, because we're different people in the room. Some of you may be thinking about the city and how can we impact the whole city, and some of you may be thinking about how can we make a difference in our neighborhood. And it doesn't matter, as I said, because these exist. And what I would challenge you to do. Let's just talk about your neighborhood. My suspicion is there's nobody in your neighborhood who has the same brokenness for it that you do, who has the same passion for it that you do. And you are the most likely person to bring together the people who might care but don't feel the compulsion to be the person who draws everybody together. You're also a logical person because your congregation, in most instances, is the only place where all of these domains gather on a regular basis. So they don't gather at the schools except maybe for a PTA meeting. They might gather for a Little League game on Saturday. But every week in your congregation, all 3 sectors, all 9 domains are represented, aren't they? Don't you have somebody who's working for the government that comes to your church? Somebody who's in the business world? Somebody who's working in nonprofits or whatever? Yeah. See, the church, that's why we call them congregations. because the church is a place where the people of the community congregate. Now, let me suggest something. Quit being the pastor of your church and become the pastor of your community. Ask God to expand the passion you have for the people in your church to the people in your community. To feel the burden and the responsibility for the lives of not only the people who are on your membership roll, but the people who are not yet on your membership roll, or might not ever be on your membership roll, might be on somebody else's. Bring together the people in your community who care about what's happening in that community. From all, not just the people who are in your congregation, but the people who might not yet be in your congregation. And you might be surprised at what the different stakeholders, the stakes that the different stakeholders have in it. Let me go back to the illustration about San Ysidro. We were surprised at the coalition that was brought together. A business donated or created an internet bubble over the entire city where families of school children could have free access to the internet. The reason they did that was we discovered that the teachers had difficulty communicating with the parents. It's largely a community of social people, people who work in the service industry. And so PTAs are not really big there because parents are working a couple of jobs and whatever. And so the teachers had very little ability to communicate with the homes of the children. So we said, well, how could we do that? We do that by internet. Well, they can't afford internet. So a business guy says, we'll just create an internet bubble and give free access. And a nonprofit said, we'll donate 800 computers for homes. The schools had the computers. We'll donate 800 computers for the homes so that they can receive this. And so the kids, when they go home, can the proper guards on the use of it. The kids that go home can have the same access to a larger world that the kids in the wealthier neighborhoods have when they go home. So now the teachers are communicating with the parents at home, generally in Spanish, because most of the teachers are bilingual, communicating in Spanish. Jose or Maria is doing this in school and is having problems with this. And now the parents are more involved in the school than they were before. One of the problems is we were talking with the district people. They said, we've had to cut out all of the PE programs because we don't have the money for PE teachers anymore, and we know that that's a problem. And so we got to looking around at who's in. And one of the things you do when you're looking at a neighborhood is what's called asset-based community development. It's not just what are the problems in this neighborhood, but what are the strengths? What's already here? What is God put here from our perspective? What does God put here? We looked around, and the Navy ships are ported in San Diego about 15 minutes away from this particular neighborhood. And so we went to the Navy and we said, we're creating a coalition here of people who care about the schools. Do you care about the schools? They said, yeah, as a matter of fact, we do. So why do you care about the schools? They said every year the number of qualified high school graduates who are qualified to go into the Navy is shrinking. We're having a hard time filling our quotas and so we want to help the schools out. So what we did, there are 8 schools, and we paired them up with 8 ships that are ported in San Diego right now so that each ship adopted a school. And on a ship, there's depending on what kind it is, anywhere from 2,000 to 5,000 sailors on it. You've got expertise in everything. Doesn't matter what they need. You've got somebody on there who's an expert in that. And so a representative from each ship sat down with each principal and said, what do you need? You need math. You need, we got people who are experts in math. We got computers. We got this. And so that each school got a tailor-made program from each ship. And so every week, sailors are going into the classrooms and helping out. Churches are going in and providing certain things. But here's kind of the most novel thing, back to the PE problem. SEAL teams train in San Diego. That's their main training base. And if anybody knows anything about physical education, it's SEALs. So every week, members of the SEAL team are at the schools in San Ysidro, running their kids through their paces. They're providing the physical education program. Now, who would have thought of that? I mean, you would have thought, well, you know, who would care about the schools? Well, you think, well, maybe a few parents, and maybe, no, it turns out businesses do. You know why the businesses were interested in seeing the kids graduate? Because the ones who weren't graduating were breaking into their businesses. And they said, if these kids stay in school, it's going to be helpful to us. Plus, they were not having a educationally qualified workforce to draw from. The Navy was interested because they don't have an educationally qualified force to draw from. The universities, San Diego State University and a private university in town, are providing free training for the teachers. You know, I can't think of the word I want now. You know, supplemental stuff that the teachers needed that they couldn't afford, the district couldn't afford. So they're going to provide. You know why it is? Because kids were having trouble qualifying to get into school, into the colleges and the universities. So it turns out there are a lot of people who had a stake in this that you would have never thought about until we got them all together and sat down and started talking about it. And so now, we identified specifically that STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, were the particular problems in this district, and those are the skills that are most needed if you want to go into the Navy or if you want to get a job outside of the service industry when you go to college. And so, we concentrated on STEM, and in one school alone, the scores went up, in the first 2 years, went up 67% in science, technology, engineering, and math, because we found out that there was a foundation in Los Angeles that has money specifically for funding. We got $1 million grant to provide STEM education, and it was specifically tied for Hispanic children. And we never knew that was there until we got to researching it. So don't underestimate when you bring a group of people who care about the same thing, centered set, who care about the same thing, to sit down and talk about how can we together work together to bring about change in this. And I would just suggest that you start with the schools. Schools are the low-hanging fruit. People are not saying, don't start with gangs. People are afraid, who've never been around gangs, are afraid of that. Don't start with drugs. That's a scary thing. Schools, everybody went to school, and everybody's had kids in school. They've gone to meetings at school. School is a good place to start. Once you start there, then you can begin to address the other issues in the neighborhood, because you've got a coalition together that is able to work together. Nearly everything Eric and I have come across, we've found someplace else. And this concept,
you've gone through that, but go to the next one.
Yeah, I'm just going to keep flying through. We've found somewhere else, and I've already talked about a city movement's collection of city sets. But in most, for Fresno, the guys in Fresno are the ones that kind of got us to thinking along these lines. But we were in India, and the meeting that we went there for wasn't all that good, frankly. But two things were important about that trip for me. One was that was the first time I'd ever had chai tea. Here's the problem. Here's why I'm not in shape. Somebody told me a few years ago, you need to do Tai Chi, and I thought they said chai tea. And I started drinking chai tea, and so now I've got a lot of caffeine, but I'm still out of shape. No, that trip was the first time I'd ever drunk chai tea, and that was before you could buy it everywhere in the United States now. And I came back and I started drinking that. But the real important reason, we met a guy named Tim Svoboda, and Tim sat down with a napkin and started drawing us a diagram. And see, most of us, when we think about transforming our city, we draw the diagram this way, that we want to bring together all the resources we can inside our congregation, outside our congregation, to do what? To build our church. Listen, I was a pastor for 35 years. I pastored 3 congregations during that time. 2 things were true. I didn't like to move a lot, so I was 8 years, 20 years, 7 years, or 7, 28. At the end of those 3 pastors, 2 things were true. First thing is, all 3 of those congregations were significantly larger than they were when I went there. The second thing that was true was all 3 of the communities around those congregations were significantly worse off than they were when I went there. Now, I'm not going to draw a one-to-one relationship between the two. that our presence there made them worse. But I do know this, there was nothing we did in the 7 years, the 20 years, and the 8 years to be salt and light in those communities. We were not a leavening presence in those communities. They were further decayed, and they were darker than they were when we went there. And if I could do it over again, I would still care about bringing people into the church to come to know Christ, to grow in their relationship with Him, and to disciple them. But I would also carry an equal burden for pastoring that community and being salt and light in that community and being a transforming presence there for some purpose other than just getting them out of the community to come into our church. And so what we typically do is if we've got an educator in our church, we say, oh, you need to be in charge of our Christian education program, or you need to be teaching a class here because you know about teaching kids. And if we've got a business person in our church, say, oh, you ought to be on the finance committee because you've got a lot of skills that will help us there. Or if we've got a media person in our church, oh, could you be in charge of our newsletter because, you know, if you could really make it a good newsletter and we could communicate to more to people what we're doing. No, we turn that around. We turn that around. Not only do we equip them to be effective in the places they are, we look for ways that we can engage, use them to bring together these kinds of coalitions in the community where they exist. Because you see, the missional presence might not be in the neighborhood where our congregation is. It may be in the place where they work. And in the place where they work, they would be the person that brings together the other believers who spend more time, by the way, at work than they do with their families or with their church or anywhere else, who would be the coalescing person in the place where they work to bring together other believers to care about the community that they work in and the community that's surrounding that. The question then comes down to, what goes at the center of the circle? You know, if we've got our sectors and we've got our domains and we view it, if this is the city, if this circle is the city, and we say, here's how, one way to transform a city or one way to transform our neighborhood is to transform the way it's working. What if businesses were to operate by the principles and the values of the kingdom? What if government agencies and entities were to operate by the principles and the values of the kingdom? What if the media were to be operating by the, if we were to help bring about the transformation of the way the city works, we would bring about the transformation of our city. So this is our city, and here's its 3 sectors, and here's its 7, 9, 12, 15 domains. But the question remains, what's in the center of the circle? When you draw that smaller circle inside the larger circle, what's in the center? I say this with all love for the church. The first Sunday I was alive, I was taken to the nursery of the Hunter Street Baptist Church in Birmingham, Alabama. I'm 69 years old. I've probably not missed more than 75 Sundays going to church in the 69 years I've been alive. I've gone to church all of my life. I went to a Baptist college. I went to a Baptist seminary. I've taught at a Baptist seminary. I'm a teaching pastor of a church now, even though I am not a senior pastor anymore. I love the church. I've given my life to the church, but the church doesn't belong in the center. The church does not belong in the center of the circle. We are not the ones who are telling everybody how to run their business. It's not our job. What goes in the center then? The needs and the dreams of the city goes in the center. And every domain brings a part to that. What's the part we bring? We would love for everybody to come to know Jesus. We're the only ones who are going to bring that part to the center. But if we're running the program, if we're running the show, other people don't come join us. Do we want there to be jobs? Do we want there to be equity and justice? Do we want there, if we want to see everything that's broken in our city transformed, then everybody who's a part of our city needs to be at the table, needs to be around the circle, which means, back to that, well, I don't need to go back to it, but the blue diagram, where the faith community is one of the slices of the pie. We need to be at the table. Something would be wrong if we weren't at the table. And we can advocate for those things that are broken in the city that other people might not think are broken, but we can bring to them, to the others in the city, or if it's a neighborhood, to others in the neighborhood. Here's something in the neighborhood, that we think really needs to be addressed. We're there at the table, but we're not the center. The goal of the church in the city or in a neighborhood is to seek the peace and the prosperity of it. To pray and to seek, the two verbs in the Jeremiah 29 passage. To pray for and to seek. Now, if you read that backwards, pray for the peace, seek the peace and prosperity of the city, pray to it, because if the city prospers, you will prosper. Who's the you there? The you are the people of God, the exiles. So who would the you be now for us? The you would be the church. We're the people of God. Let's read that backwards. How do the people of God prosper? They prosper if the city's prospering. How does the city prosper? If the people of God are praying and seeking the peace and the prosperity of the city. It may be that one of the reasons our churches are struggling is that the people of God are not praying and seeking the peace and prosperity of the city. We're seeking the peace and the prosperity of our churches. And so our first and primary function in relation to our neighborhood is the peace and the prosperity of that neighborhood. And we're the ones who are praying for it. And we're the ones who are working for it and bringing others who have a stake in it together. And then as we work together, then our neighborhood or our city has more of the shalom of God, where everything is working in a healthy way. And when that happens, then our churches our lives as people of God become stronger. Wrap it up, Eric.
Very good. I think, Sam, that was a good wrap-up right there.
Okay.
That was, I think we'll just end right here, and we'll show a little video here.